it seems fitting that we revisit one of our biggest interviews of the year.
And that was speaking to Rishi Sunak before he became Prime Minister, when we asked him if he would rule out any blanket lockdowns if he got the top job.
Let's remind ourselves of what he said.
Onto your policies and lockdown and the impact that has had on the country's finances, on the economy as a whole. Your reflections on that now?
Well, look, I want to be careful, Esther, because I was part of a government and I take that seriously, and you've served in government, you know what it's like. And look, when you're in the team, it doesn't mean you agree with every decision, but if you're part of the team, you sign up to that and you stay in government and you defend the decision. So I don't want to sit here and criticise things that the government did, because that's not the right thing to do. That's not the Conservative thing to do. But look, I think it's no great secret that, throughout that process, I was keen to try and make sure that all parts of the impact of lockdowns were considered, because, yes, there was an argument that they could help slow the spread of COVID, but it's very clear, and we learnt more over time, that they were also having a significant impact on lots of other things, people's mental health, other health outcomes when people were not getting other treatment, obviously the economy and people's jobs, which long-term impacts their health as well, and notably on our kids and their education. And I was constantly trying to make sure that all those things were taken into account as well. And look, right at the end, I was away on a government trip abroad last Christmas. I flew back home deliberately to make sure that I could make the argument strongly that this country did not go into another lockdown because of Omicron. And we really were sleepwalking in that direction at that moment. We were hours away from a press conference that was about to announce it. And I led the charge with a couple of others and saying, no, this would be a mistake for our country. The data didn't support it. We could just wait to see what was happening in South Africa. And I'm really glad I did. It wasn't an easy thing to do because the entire kind of establishment was saying we got to lock down. But I'm glad I stood up to them. I'm glad I made the argument that was the wrong thing to do, and I'm glad that was ultimately vindicated.
So if you became Prime Minister, can you say you wouldn't blanket lockdown again for another COVID-type pandemic?
I think it would be wrong for anyone to sit here, Esther, and say that they can never rule out in all circumstances. But I think people have seen my record over the last couple of years and what I did in December with Omicron. For me, the bar is very high, because I think there's lots of things that you need to take into account in those decisions.
Okay, I'm going to repeat this question again. A blanket lockdown for a COVID-type pandemic. Can you say yes or no, you would or wouldn't lock down again?
Well, I think a blanket lockdown, in the way we did it before, clearly was far too blunt an instrument, as we discovered. And we learned as we went along that there wasn't the need for that type of blanket lockdown. And that's why, over time, we could find different ways to deal with this. And actually, for COVID, now we have vaccines and new antiviral treatments. It would seem to me highly unlikely that you would ever need to do a lockdown for a COVID-type pandemic, because we already now have the protections, which mean that it wouldn't be necessary to stop something very bad happening, because we've got a bunch of protections now against COVID. So it seems to me highly, highly unlikely that you would ever need to do something like that.
So that was us interviewing Rishi Sunak there during the summer when the leadership election was going on. What did you think to what he said there?
Well, I remember watching this interview and really being so grateful to you, Esther, that you pushed him. But he didn't answer the question. He never answered your question, and he didn't rule out lockdowns. And he also clearly in that interview said he still thought that lockdowns stopped the spread of COVID. Look at what's happening in China. We've just been talking about it. China has had the harshest, most brutal, ruthless lockdowns, with people literally sealed in their homes. Everybody's wearing masks. It hasn't worked. All it's done is delay it. It's a bit like, and perhaps this is a very crass analogy, but it's a bit like taking HRT. It doesn't stop you getting the menopause. It just means you only get the menopause when you come off the pills. And I think this is all that lockdown does. It might very well put a lid on it for a while, but once you can't keep people locked down forever. And look at what's happening in China.